presentation. And here I'm with David Cadman. We are here to talk about my recent rankings and research that I conducted, looking at cities around the globe and what they're specifically doing to mitigate and adapt to climate change. I will do the presentation and give a background on the research project itself, because I've received many requests from cities as well as some media wanting to understand a little bit more about what were the proxies, how did I actually go about my analysis. I'll give a little bit of summary of that. Then I'm going to provide an overview of the themselves, the top 10 cities, and what I personally have found impressive or interesting, and a comparison, a way to provide some comparison across the cities around the globe. And we'll finish with some discussions about observations and next steps, leading into Councillor Cadman presenting a little bit about what ICLEI is doing now to lead the world in terms of promoting adoption of resilient cities practices. Of course, then we'll open it up to questions. We're looking forward to hearing from you on the call. That made my first ranking of resilient cities. To my knowledge, it's one of the first ever rankings of resilient cities. And to be perfectly honest, it comes up short of what I would like to see in future rankings in terms of robust, rigorous analysis of key factors that really will drive whether a city is resilient or not. But it was a lot of work, and I believe I'm proud of what we achieved with this first round, and I'm hopeful to get feedback from lots of you on how we could make better for the next iteration. Several factors that I used to measure resilient cities, and to me, one of the first and most important is leadership and commitment at the senior levels with cities, and of course that begins with the mayors and their city council and staff. Cities, and they could get up to 6 points. They essentially get 1 point for every one of these variables here. Had they published a climate action plan? Are they members of C40? And as you probably all know, you can either be a formal member or you can be an affiliate member. So either way, they got a point. Are you a participant in the Mayor's Council on Climate Change? Were you a signatory of the Mexican Pact in Cancun last year? And are you participating in the Green Cities Challenge from the Carbon War Room? From a few months ago that I published, where I was quoting how regional and federal government agencies and executives and political elected officials from both sides of the fence, and this was really important for me to promote that. What's very interesting is, of course, heads of state around the globe are not feeling this bipartisan angst about addressing climate change. But in North America, we do have that issue. However, in North America, we have regional, whether they be governors or mayors, that doesn't matter what political affiliation they have, they are moving forward with climate action. I have excellence, which is essentially measured by two things. What are emissions per capita, and what are their targets? And from their action plans, from the C40, and from other sources I could find. And BRT systems, and per capita usage ranking, and I use density rankings as well. There's a lot of debate now, of course, about how cities be, and is there a point where you get beyond the ideal density. This very interesting. I saw it a few weeks ago. I thought it was worth putting in here. If the world's population were to live as in a region as dense as some of the cities in my rankings, like Paris and San Francisco, New York, and London, how much of the entire world would be required in terms of physical space to support the 1 billion people currently living on the planet? Now, obviously, I'm not advocating we all around the world live in Texas. Personally, I'm from the U.S., and I don't want to live in this right now. I'm happy living in Vancouver, but the bigger point is that obviously we are not living very dense in any parts of the world if we're taking up as much physical space as we currently are. And have a lot more room to go, in my opinion, on density. And obviously, all the cities in this ranking are doing quite well. I did want to call your attention to Jeb Brugman's recent book called Urban Revolution, where he talks a lot about the importance of density, and he also clarifies that density goes way beyond population per square kilometer, but it's also about accessibility to services, proximity, and scale that enables infrastructure for us to move forward and more sustainable. 1 to 5 is basically a percentage of the city's energy supply comes from renewable portfolio. I continue doing a lot more work on, but I did 2 variables to start with. One was a fairly robust analysis of adaptation plans for all the cities involved in the ranking, and I rate them from 1 to 5 depending on what level of depth they've gone into with adaptation. Not probably many people on this call, but most of the cities came up pretty short in this area in terms of what's already done. There was 1 if they had just say climate action plan, a need to do adaptation work, and 2 was they had some planning involved. 3 was they'd started to implement a strategy around adaptation. 4 was they have ongoing project activity, and 5 would have been robust, integrated adaptation plan that has been generated through engagement with the community. Implementation is already well underway, and as you can guess, no one in the sample got a 5 on that. I also included parks ranking, and obviously having green space in parks and trees is a component of mitigation strategy, but it's also considered best practice for adaptation. It helps stormwater runoff and helps with the urban heat island effect, which a lot of the cities in the sample are going to be facing in the future. Future ranking criteria, I'd like to include green buildings. I've done that with my U.S. rankings because I could get data on all cities, but I have a hard time gathering data from every country and every city in the world as a mega city in the study, so I need to get better for that. Electrified transit systems, cycling metrics, water and waste management. What are cities doing to promote and encourage low carbon business activity in their city? Obviously, food security is a huge issue. I'd like to get more on that. Policy flexibility for resilience and activity in IT systems are some of the variables I'd like to capture in the future. This really interesting report that came out just a few months ago from the Urban Climate Change Research Network that studied cities around the world, and this is what this diagram they've come up with that shows where the overlapping issues associated with climate adaptation for cities. And I think we could go deep around this and actually create proxies and variables for each of these factors and use them in a future ranking as well. So now Copenhagen, of course, was number 1. The only city in my study to score a perfect 6 out of 6 on political commitment. That obviously is a very important aspect of this study is the cities that are really doing a lot are also really active in participating in some of these networks and groups, allow them to share best practices and gain information from each other and be active participants in the transition to the economy. Copenhagen is doing a lot with transit. They have lines of rapid transit. They have suburban rail lines. Probably the most impressive thing about Copenhagen, most of those on the phone know, is that 40% of their population actually cycle. So they're doing pretty impressive things on there. While their density might not be as high in terms of population, their density of their cycling paths are probably unrivaled in the world. And what they're doing around renewables, they are first in the world as far as GHG per capita at just 2.1 tons per capita of GHG. They also have the most ambitious GHG target in the world of any city, any major capital city, which is achieve carbon neutrality by 2025, and the amount of renewables as part of their portfolio. here's one of their local renewable energy projects, the Middle-Grunden offshore wind farm. This is one of their oldest parks in Copenhagen, and from adaptation is one of the areas that I found in my study where cities are the furthest away from having this figured out. In my mind, the way I define resilience is what are cities doing to both mitigate and adapt to climate change to prepare for the future. And on the nation side, I think most of the cities in this study that I conducted, and the top 10, are doing a lot of healthy, impressive work around mitigation. There's a lot more to go around adaptation, just getting their minds around it, let alone implementing adaptation plans. It's obviously a world-famous city and poster child for sustainable development, and not surprising to see them on this list of top 10. The surprising thing was I couldn't find a climate action plan for them. They may have done some planning, but they probably haven't generated a formal climate action plan. If somebody on this call has seen one, I'd love to see it. I looked in C40, which C40 posts all the climate action plans from all cities that are affiliates, and Curitiba is one of them. And I did a lot of independent research, and I could not uncover a climate action plan for them. So obviously there's some work to do there. They're not active members or participating with the Carbon War Room. What Curitiba has is the innovation around their BRT system, which become a model for the world. It's been adopted in I think near 100 other communities around the world. I travel to Bogota on a regular basis, and of course Bogota has definitely embraced Curitiba's BRT system in a big way, and is I think over 1.5 million users per day in Bogota. In Curitiba, they have about 1.3 users per day, and in general, Curitiba uses about 30% less fuel per capita than comparative cities in Brazil. The other city tied with 1 GHG per capita, obviously they're in one of the developing countries, the BRIC countries, whereas the cities that were in my were actually already in developed countries, so there's some advantage in terms of less average consumption per capita than in developed countries, but obviously a lot, as we all know, on this phone call. And also on the renewable side, a very healthy share of renewables in their electricity portfolio, thanks to Brazil, of course, being a pretty strong in that, as well as in biofuels and other areas. So they're doing a lot. I think they came in second in the study. Curitiba, compared to a lot of the cities in the study, is that they have actually done a lot of work around adaptation. Obviously, one of the most innovative things they've done, this slide is an example of parks that they introduced back about 3 decades ago, close to 4 decades ago, beside their rivers. While Curitiba is actually the highest elevation city that made the top 10 in my ranking, one would say maybe they're at less risk for floods, or at least from sea level rise, but they are at severe risk of flooding from their rivers, and they noticed this decades ago and decided to come up with an innovative solution, which is essentially to create parks that go right along the river. And there are times